Okay, welcome everybody. Can you hear me clearly? Good, thank you. Welcome to this session. It's the post-lunch session, but it's an on-demand session. So last couple of years, people in the feedback have said, we want to hear more about investment. We want to hear more from investors. And so this session is all about giving an opportunity for you to hear more views and also potentially ask some questions down the road. So about halfway through, I'll turn over and see whether or not there are any questions from the floor. My name is Matthew Durdy. I'm the Chief Executive of the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult. I'm actually an investment banker by first career, biologist by training. But for the last 20 years, I've been in what is now the cell and gene therapy industry. It obviously didn't exist when I first got into it. So it's my pleasure. I'm just here to chair, and we have two fantastic speakers for you. Jim Birchenough, who will introduce himself later, and Daniella Kranjac, near enough. So let's kick off with that. Let's hear a little bit about the people who are going to be talking to you. Daniella, tell us a little bit about yourself, the organization you want to talk about, and what the sweet spot is for them.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much to ARM for the invitation. Pleasure to be here. And Daniella Kranjac, and we were talking about the English versus the Croatian pronunciation. In the US, it's Kranjac, but as we're in Rome, we'll go with the European pronunciation. I'm founding GP at Avant Bio, and Avant Bio, for those of you who might not be familiar, we are a growth equity fund focused entirely on therapeutic enabling technologies. What that means, quite simply, we invest in the tools, the tech, the services, everything that is fundamental for biotech and pharma, and specifically also in cell and gene therapy. That means any kind of platform technologies, tools, consumables, CDMO and CRO services. We also do invest in health tech and tech bio in the broader life sciences field, but we do not invest in therapeutics, so that is a bright line for us. We don't take that binary risk associated with therapeutics, but we are very keen on the industry. Maybe just to give you a sense, we typically look for companies who are revenue generating, generally between 5 and 10 million in revenue, need not be profitable, but with an eye towards profitability. And when we look at these opportunities, I should say also we do like to see things earlier than that, so that we can follow your story. We can see how you grow over time, and we can get that experience with you as an entrepreneur and lend a hand if we can along the way. So that just because we do growth equity doesn't mean we're not interested in seeing seed or Series A opportunities in the market.
Thank you. Jim.
Yeah, so Jim Birchenough, I'm co-head of biopharma banking at Barclays. I am a physician by training, practice both in the US and Canada. I started my career in the Merck Research Labs in Montreal, pivoted to sales and marketing when ACE inhibitors and statins were launching in Canada. At Barclays, we're very much focused on the cell and gene therapy space. I've been an analyst for 20 years prior to my banking career, and the first company I covered was Biopharmaceuticals as a pioneer in antisense, and had the luxury of seeing Avexis and Spinraza, Zolgensma and Spinraza developed at the same time. And so I've seen some of the pioneering biology underlying some of the advances in cell and gene therapy, and have the opportunity to work with a lot of companies in the space. Looking forward to the discussion.
And from a Barclays perspective, what's the sort of sweet spot of the organizations that you like to work with?
Yeah, so we'll go anywhere from Series A right through to large pharma. I'd say the sweet spot is 500 million to 2 billion. It's typically, we're dealing with a lot of the small mid-cap biotech companies that are development stage. That group of companies that have pretty voracious capital needs is where we tend to spend a lot of time.
Great, so between the three of us, we've got a bit of the ecosystem here. So the Catapult works in early stage venture creation. Daniella's getting in there relatively early, but still at revenue, and then we're getting to a bit larger. Right, the title of this session was Breakthroughs Business and Investment Horizons. I've juggled it around a bit. The first thing we're going to talk about is a little bit about where we are today, the business, what's going on, what's not. Then we'll look at, what some of the breakthroughs are, what some of the things that are coming forward, and then we'll go a little bit further out into the horizon in terms of what we think the future looks like. So to kick us off, Jim, you've seen a broad range of companies. You know, a poor investment environment, people recognize as today. That's, in my view, that's a symptom of what's going on. What do you see what's going on today?
So, you know, I would say we clearly had too many companies go public before they were ready, and the cell and gene therapy space was part of that. We had a lot of companies that had really exciting tools and toolkits, but didn't necessarily have a mobilization of the business around clear business cases. They came public with really open-ended capital needs, unclear business case, a milestone path for value creation that was also a little unclear, and not really good benchmarks for success, and it's resulted in a lot of digestion on the public market side that's fed back to the private market side. In that digestion, we've had the haves and the have-nots, and so when I look at, you know, what's working, what's working are companies that understand the biology of their disease, they have good preclinical models to work with, early biomarkers to benchmark for success, endpoints that are translatable into true clinical benefit, but also that commercial translatability as well. And I think that's really important because a lot of companies, again, when I talk about patient-centric, they did things in cell and gene therapy because they could, as opposed to that they should. And you know, Tim Hunt and I were talking about this last night, this idea of, you know, just because we can do something, should we? And I think really understanding the commercial end markets and really the translatability from the biology all the way through to that commercial market, I think it's been missing a bit, but it certainly is what I see as dividing the haves versus the have-nots in the market today.
Is that the way you see it, Daniella?
Yeah, to echo that in terms of maybe the private market perspective and understanding what we're seeing on the tools and tech and services space, right? We, in some ways, it was a tale of too much capital, and yet in a different way, too little capital, right? So too much capital thrown at, I think, initiatives like establishing multiple facilities. There was obviously a large overbuilding of facilities in the sector, specifically in cell and gene. Those facilities are now shuttering, unfortunately, and you know, we've seen too many recent closures. I think we'll see more. That was a build versus buy debate that I think a lot of folks maybe were on the wrong side of. And to the point about, you know, making sure that the biology drives and that you have the clear unmet need, that you're really driving towards a commercial success with a therapeutic. On the tools side, it's a little harder because there's fewer investors, certainly on tools. I think in some ways there were a lot of buildup around multiple products achieving the same endpoint, and that goes for the tool space. So we may not need a dozen different variations of a bioreactor. We may not need, and that's picking on my own history as commercializing Wave in the late 90s. But you know, understanding what is the benefit, does that benefit translate to the customer? Is it tangible? Because you know, introducing a new bioreactor that doesn't have, let's say, an order of magnitude improvement over yield or productivity or cost is really not going to move the needle for anyone. And so it will be hard pressed to find people to evaluate that new technology. That being said, I think innovators want to see new technologies. So the therapeutic innovators do want to support, but they are bombarded, right, with all of these requests on evaluations. So I think they're struggling with their own challenges and trying to do the best they can. One thing we've seen in the industry now is that it's really, and I think hitting into this, I actually did a bit of an informal poll with some colleagues and bankers in the sector. The general feeling is that it's no longer about a rising tide lifts all boats in the sector. That has been the case for maybe decades at this point, and so it becomes more about the ability to execute, the team that is executing, and the clear-headedness to get to that commercial success as I see the tools industry, and of course, Jim, comment on the therapeutic side.
So I'm going to go off-piste already. I'm going off-piste. But you've intrigued me a bit with what you said there, because the tools and technology side of things, having been in the space for many years, you go through phases where there are no investors in tools and technologies. Now there's
Sorry, there are no.
Sorry, the industry goes through phases, and sometimes there are no investors in tools and technologies. Yeah. Now there are a handful of investors in tools and technologies. I've, over the years, looked at tools and technology investment, and I've been in startups in tools and technologies. It's incredibly difficult to work out the winners. When you're out looking for winners in the tools and technology space, there's a guidance. In therapeutics, there's a sort of, you start with a clear patient need, which you can work back from. The need in tools and technologies is less well expressed. What are you out looking for? How do you pick winners in that space?
Yeah, it's a great, and maybe I'll go back to some of my experience
Sure.
back in the day, because I didn't touch on the how I got to here. So early on, I was very lucky in my career to be part of Wave Biotech as a startup. Wave Biotech, the Wave bioreactor, of course, the Zuri, which is a Cytiva product today, acquired by Danaher, acquired by GE, I should say, in 2007. That business was bootstrapped. People don't really know that. There was no external funding in that environment. Right. We started in 1998. 1999, probably it was about 2002 before we really needed to accelerate with funding, and there was nobody in the landscape doing that. And somehow we made it work. We reinvested every penny in the company. We had great line of sight. We had some really innovative groups like, for example, Centocor at the time, now J&J with Remicade. They took a risk on that technology and implemented it immediately. We were two people, one in a garage and one in a dorm room, but we got that immediate validation from a user that said, this is needed. And I think that might be what's missing in the market today, because everyone sort of thinks about, oh, there's an opportunity here, I'm going to make a better mousetrap, but we don't need 12 better mousetraps. Yeah. We need 1 or 2 that work. But
isn't it the case that back then you were the only game in town to some extent? I mean, there wasn't the same degree of competition that there is today.
I mean, there was to a degree. It was maybe easier in a sense. There was no LinkedIn, so folks did not know how large the company was at the time. So we were a little bit lucky in that respect. We got great traction and great results early, and that sort of fed the flywheel. The commercialization went, but it was hard. It was hard. I mean, we struggled for a while. We were facing incumbents, though, that were very strong, not other startups that were trying to do the same thing. So we were facing, stir tank reactors, glass, stainless steel reactors, different approaches, airlift reactors. Not sure if they're even.
And it was that co-development side of things.
Yeah, roller bottles. So there was a lot, but I think that when you see that trajectory, right, and we got to a point where we wanted to raise money, we were profitable, we were growing, doubling sales year on year, but we were unable to attract capital because there was just nobody interested in that market. So to your point, I think now we're seeing, yes, there is some interest. What do we look for? We look for teams more than anything. People. It really comes down to the people, and I think that's a commentary on what we've seen, this trajectory now. It's going to come down. If a rising tide does not lift all boats anymore, then it is going to come down to the team, and it's going to come down to being able to pivot if things don't work. Before I move on to the second part, Jim, on the technology side, do you guys look at that much? Do you have any insights on that side of things?
I think on our side, we typically look at the use case, and the teams become important as well. And so I think how the tools are being applied becomes the important determinant of success more than the tool itself. And the teams that are shepherding that forward becomes even more important, actually. And then the final part, in being able to attract capital, those two aspects, the use case and the teams, become really the anchor to the capital that can be attractive.
Some things don't change, do they? I remember one of my first mentors saying to me, first 3 things you need to look at are the management, and the management. Yeah. And after that, you can talk to me about the technology. Okay, I'm going to move on to breakthroughs. So that's part of the subject. What's coming up? So I'm going to start with Daniella. You know, we haven't actually talked much about the elephant in the room, but it's been talked about a lot this morning, which is, you know, cost of goods. All right. Actually, if there's going to be a dynamic in the industry, cost of goods needs to change to allow margins, which allows breathing room for organizations to compete. What are the big breakthroughs you're seeing come up, Daniella?
What are we seeing?
Yeah.
I think, you know, for us, it's going to be about seeing some commercial successes out of cell and gene therapy that then will drive further investment, that then will sort of bring back retail investors. What I was thinking about in this, in preparation for this was, you know, just the observation that, you know, recently we saw Sarepta down, I don't know, 27%, you can probably correct me on that, but 27-30%. What was really interesting to me in that case, right, it's a very important therapeutic that's available to a small population, very ill population. And, you know, on let's say, suspicion that a supplier was supplying Sarepta, this supplier's stock also was hit about 10%, right, as a result. And so retail investors, I think, not understanding fully that relationship between the supply and the innovators, I think that's a very dangerous one. I think that's, you know, probably not what we need for the market, and it worries me a bit, because in an isolated case, if your suspicion is that this supplier is supplying Sarepta, but you're not addressing the half dozen other suppliers that for sure are supplying Sarepta, it just, there's a lack of congruity there, and that I think is maybe a question about, back to Jim's point, whether or not these companies should have gone public at certain stages, and quite a lot of them maybe didn't need to go public quite so early.
Is there an information question in there as well? I mean, if people, you know, about the market having enough information about these companies, is the coverage good enough?
Do they not know? I mean, they're analysts. They know everything, right?
I'm going to plead the fifth on that one.
They know a lot. They know a lot. They're well informed.
Yeah, well, sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, the more companies there are, the more going on in the space, and the less analysts there are because of the section, the poorer the information becomes.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, Jim, breakthroughs. You know, if we, you know, the other sort of side of bringing the cost down, or the other component of bringing the cost down, is bringing the volumes up. All right. And so when you're out there looking at the therapeutics and what's out there in the space, what is it that's really going to drive the scale of the industry going forward? What are you seeing breakthrough-wise?
Yeah, I think so. There's a few threads there. One, I think if we're going to start addressing more prevalent diseases, safety is going to be critically important. And so, and we've seen some examples of some very precise directed genetic medicines with success recently. We had a PCSK9 base editing experiment that went very well recently in the last few days, and that showed, you know, massive reduction in LDL cholesterol. We saw success in alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency with a similar base editing approach. So we're very excited about some of the breakthroughs in very precise targeted gene correction, and that can be large gene insertions in a very precise way. It can be base editing, prime editing. We're also excited about delivery, safer delivery, and delivery to tissues beyond the liver, which we're seeing with both LNP and AAV delivery. And then finally, we had an approval last year for 2 separate cell therapy products for solid tumors, and we're starting to see cell therapies expand from niche hematologic malignancies to solid tumors, and that's very exciting. I think as you think about the scale up into more prevalent populations, it becomes more of a paradigm shift. And so where we've seen some of the companies struggling is, you know, how they handle their view of the paradigm shift and how is this going to work. And a great example is AMD. And, you know, intuitively it seems to make sense that if we could avoid doing monthly to every 2-month injections to elderly patients with AMD, that should be a good thing. We've had some gene therapy results that have suggested we can largely do that. 80% reductions in Eylea injections, a large proportion of patients injection-free. You would think this is a really good thing for a prevalent population, but what it is a paradigm shift, and investors aren't quite sure how is that paradigm going to shift. How's that paradigm actually going to shift? How does this impact the different stakeholders? How are the retinal docs who are having a regular flow through their practice going to deal with this if they're losing a profit center, as an example? And if you're going to shift the paradigm, it needs to be a durable shift. No one wants to go to a one and done away from regular injections, shift their whole practice away from that, and then have to shift the practice back to regular injections because you haven't had durability. And so, the two things that as I think about scale up, safety and durability of effect, I think are going to be two very key things. We're seeing some great advances that line up with that. Again, some of the targeted gene editing and gene therapies. And then on the solid tumor side, I think broadening into the CAR T space, bringing those T cells and other immune cells to solid tumors, I think is another area of a lot of excitement.
Interesting, very interesting. Daniella, did you want to add anything onto that in terms of?
On breakthroughs?
On growth and volume and therapeutics and the likes?
Yeah, I think one of the topics that we've been struggling with is maybe the topic of automation, to go back to some of the earlier comments. I think the jury is out. Certainly automation seems like a great idea. However, automating a suboptimal process inherently just gives you a faster suboptimal process. And so can we do better with, for example, unit operations? Can we do better with loading cargo into cells, transfection? Can we do better with some of those individual steps, and then do best-in-class approach, which has been kind of traditionally within biologics, more generally, the path forward, right? And so we've kind of decided to jump that unit operation optimization and go towards automation in this industry, or at least trying to go directed towards automation.
I think we'll see multiple, there's a couple of talks later on, so it'll be interesting to be in those. I think there are multiple approaches to it. One of them is the sort of black box approach, but I think there are plenty of unit operation approaches as well, which, as I agree, are going to be necessary.
Exactly.
Not messing with the biology, just trying to do what you're doing more efficiently, and then let's get to better products.
Well, I have to draw from experience in biologics to sort of make this fit for me. And as we think about opportunities and solutions in the industry, thinking back to maybe, I guess it was late 90s, early 2000s, when roller bottles were still being used, and there was a big initiative to make $1 million roller bottle robot. And that the idea would be it would just sort of move things and put it back. Yeah. I'm not sure how many of those were placed in the industry. I saw one myself in I think it was Denver, at an Amgen facility, and that was short-lived because it didn't really solve the problem.
Yeah, it didn't ever look like it was going to be the long-term solution.
Right. So it's going to be interesting. And certainly whether it's allogeneic or autologous, there's going to be a difference.
There's another dynamic in the whole of that. Brilliant. Right, I'm going to move on to the last section of the thing before the final question, which is just really looking forward. We've got a chaotic market at best, or a static market, depending on which way you want to look at it. Jim, what needs to change? And how do you see the evolution from where we are today, aside from the geopolitical situation, which is quite hard to ignore entirely, but we're trying to do that on this stage right now. How do you see the development of the market going forwards, back to something that people can work with?
So when I started covering the sector back in 2000, I reached back to 98 and tried to capture a metric that would go through the cycle, which at the time was around the sequencing of the human genome. And as I've tracked the aggregate capital for the sector, and the enterprise value attached to that. There's a ratio that I've looked at prospectively for 25 years, almost 30, of EV to cash. And that metric has troughed at 2 times EV to cash in 04, 08, 2012, 2016, 2020. So I say that to say we've seen this before. We've gone through these downturns before. And typically when we get recovery, what happens is you see growth becoming scarce elsewhere in the economy. So, a lot of, market commentators will point to interest rates and the high cost of capital being a problem for biotech specifically. What we found historically is the greater correlation is an inverse correlation with GDP growth. And so as growth is abundant elsewhere in the economy, investors don't have to take risk in biotech. As growth becomes more scarce and they look for other sources of growth, that's where they come back to healthcare, where we see the generalists coming back to biotech. And so one of the unintended consequences that may benefit our sector over some of the, what we're hearing on the macro policy side is as growth slows elsewhere in the sector, we expect generalist funds to come back to biotech, number one. Number two, we haven't seen the M&A yet this year that everyone had forecast. And I think what's happening is pharma's looking at the sector under pressure and saying, we don't have to rush into this. They don't have any fear of missing out. We can wait 3 more months and the sector's still going to be depressed. As you start to get recovery, what we've also found is that's when you see M&A activity pick up. Pharma says, okay, we're going to miss this if we don't move now, and that tends to compound the recovery. So as I look forward, I think it's hard to say exactly when we're going to see a recovery, but I'd say back half of the year, we should start to see generalist funds coming to biotech, and I think it's going to be a hockey stick. I think it's going to be a real inflection because we know that there are LOEs on the part of pharma. We know they need to act. I think that's going to create the FOMO for them to act. And so, again, have seen this before. I think a recovery leads M&A, not the other way around, is how this is going to go.
Brilliant. Well, let's hope that's optimistic, and let's hope that's the case. I did promise to come to the floor. Does anybody have any questions in the audience? No? I don't see any.
I could actually build on.
So, Daniella,
might
please.
build on what Jim was saying. I think one of the things we often see also within tools and tech is that it tends to be a front runner to that recovery. So we generally are a little bit more insulated from the shock of the binary risk that biotech has, right? And so when you look to some of the performance and some of the figures that are being posted, and here I might plug our newsletter very quickly, which is going to be coming out, I believe, later today or tomorrow. So if you do go to our website, avant.bio, and sign up there, or our LinkedIn, you can get it directly to your LinkedIn feed. So that'll be a preview. But I think we've seen pockets of M&A activity in life science industrials. We've seen recently some news from Lilly expanding facilities, the intention of Novo to expand Catalent's or double Catalent's capacity, I think, over the next couple of years. We've seen a surge in investments in cell and gene in our space, about 30%, and that's over last year. So there are some bright sparks there that we're seeing, and I think the headwinds that we haven't touched on, the tariffs, the NIH grants, and those issues. Obviously, we wish we could reverse the clock a bit and still have that environment, but we can't do everything. So.
It's been very interesting for me. I don't want to go into the tariffs too much, but it's been really interesting how robust the people I have met here in the last 24 hours or so about, at the end of the day, it's kind of like when times are tough, healthcare is actually quite a good place to be. And it's an odd thing to think of as a safe harbor, but actually that seems to be the sentiment, and we will get through this. So I've got a few seconds left. I would like to get a parting gem of wisdom from you. What's the big breakthrough, the big thing that you'd like to see happen that would change the dynamic for the industry over the course of the next, well, you choose the time period.
I'm not sure if it's one big breakthrough. I think for me, as I was giving this some thought, it's more about a consistent, reproducible commercial successes sprinkled in with maybe a little bit of the retail investors coming back to the market, that should get us where we need to go.
You want to see a return to what I describe as the benign cycle, good results, good investment returns, more investment. Yeah, I think
because it can't just be a one blockbuster in a sense.
because then you're back into the volatility.
Because you're back into the same.
Makes everybody so confused. Jim.
Yeah, I would say, and I give some thought to this, a breakthrough in collaboration. I think there's a role for ARM within this. And I think back to a catalyst for the sickle cell category where ASH, FDA, and the advocacy community collaborated on an open session on endpoints for sickle cell disease. And that prompted the approval of an oral hemoglobin modifier, a P-selectin antibody, and several gene therapy approaches. And I think what I'd like to see is that kind of, I'd like to see more of that collaboration between industry, regulators, advocacy groups to advance endpoints for cell and gene therapy. I think that's going to be key. I think we've got the technology. I think that part of it, the collaboration, I think will get us the rest of the way there.
That's a good place to wind up. So I'm going to summarize very briefly a couple of the key points. One is this idea of collaboration and partnership and working with others to develop a product, which is very much a strong part of the cell and gene therapy Catapult, but also a big part of ARM, I think. The second one was just about people, teams. And the third one, which I think is just great news, is that being in the healthcare sector is a better place to be in a stormy environment. So with that, I would ask you to thank our panelists, our speakers, for a great insight. Great, well done.